Li Yunxiao squinted at Luo Yuncheng and thought, she has got a great body, long hair, and a pretty face. If she were to wear a red gown, silver horn boots, a blue cloak, and the frosty sorrow, I bet she would look exactly like Red Lotus Marshall's sovereign, hee. She's got a lot of potential for wearing costumes. I wonder if Red Lotus would kill me if she knew what I was thinking. Luo Yuncheng's heart gave a jerk. Li Yunxiao's eyes seemed to flicker with a smile, and that made her shudder inexplicably. It was like a tame rabbit had suddenly been spotted by a tiger. A momentary sense of powerlessness made her feel like falling into an ice cellar. What was that? The boy's eyes, was he laughing? No way. I am a great martial master of the Four Quadrants realm. How could I be distracted by the glance of a common boy? It must be because I've been stuck in that problem lately that I'm a bit unsettled. The look of horror in her eyes flashed away, and she soon recovered from the momentary loss of composure. Her face darkened, and a sneer flickered around her lips. Li Yunxiao, we were talking about the crafting of weapons. Can you tell us how many methods common weapons are made with? Luo Yuncheng was teaching the basic course on crafting weapons. Although only a handful of people could become alchemists, the most basic knowledge of weapon crafting was what every warrior must know. The crafting of weapons? Ha! I'm a 9th-tier Emperor-grade alchemist of the heavenly martial continent. Who in the world but those few undying old fogies would dare to speak of the methods of weapon crafting in front of me? Li Yunxiao said carelessly, there are 48 methods of crafting common weapons. 48? The classroom suddenly fell silent before bursting into laughter. Ha ha. This fella must be talking in his sleep. I told you so. If I had only looked at his composure, I would have thought he really knew the answer. TSK. If he knew the right answer, I would have been a state guard. Li Yunxiao frowned as his glance fell on the textbook in front of him. He flipped open it and immediately saw a sentence. There are 36 methods of crafting common weapons, which are. When he closed the book, he saw a row of large words on the cover page, basic artifact crafting, and beneath it was a clear row of smaller words, by Yang Di. Didn't I tell him there are 48 common methods? That brat actually turned a deaf ear to my words? He'll never have to come to my lecture again. He had sentenced the author of the textbook to death in an instant. Yang Di would have cried himself to death. That made anger rise in her. Yang Di would have cried himself to death if he had known this. Yunxiao paid no mind to all the mockery. There are 36 orthodox crafting methods, he said in a calm tone. But 60 years ago, Gu Feiyang had invented 12 technical crafting methods, which have been recognized by the Association of Alchemists and listed as basic crafting methods. So, there should be 48. TSK. What nonsense is this brat talking about? Does he know more than Lord Yang Di? Ha ha. He must be afraid of being punished, so he has started talking nonsense. Precisely. How could Lord Yang Di, a student of Lord Gu Feiyang, not know how many basic crafting methods there are? The whole classroom was filled with mockery, but a sudden shout silenced everyone. Shut up. He's right. Yuncheng slapped the table, causing a gust of strong wind to spread out in all directions. Everyone felt an overbearing force come pushing at them, and their faces fell in horror. Some of the students near the podium were as pale as paper, as if on the point of coughing blood. Yunxiao smiled inwardly as he felt the wind. Tier 2 stars of the Four Quadrants realm, she sure has a gift. And her soul seems to be very strong. I reckon she's at least a senior apprentice alchemist." He was a little surprised. He had known Luo Yunchang to be very formidable, but he had never expected her to be at such a high level. Martial warriors were divided into 9 levels. The Origin Realm, the 2 Forces Realm, the 3 Powers Realm, the 4 Quadrants Realm, the 5 Elements Realm, the 6 Directions Realm, the 7 Constellations Realm, the 8 Desolation Realm, and the 9 Heavens Realm. Each level was divided into 9 tiers, from 1 star to 9 stars. As soon as one reached the peak of the 9 Heavens Realm, one would be granted a title by the Holy City, becoming a conferred martial sovereign. Yunchang stared coldly at Li Yunxiao as a hint of surprise flashed through her mind. Then, she glanced at the crowd and began to explain slowly. There have always been 36 basic crafting methods. 60 years ago, Lord Gu Feiyang, with his unparalleled talent, had invented 12 additional methods, which were recognized by the Association of Alchemists. It's just that these 12 methods are completely beyond the grasp of the average person, so Lord Yang Di didn't include them when he wrote this textbook. All the students were astonished and looked incredulous as they fixed their eyes on Li Yunxiao, who appeared to be perfectly calm. It was like the student at the bottom of the class had suddenly solved a problem that even the top students could not. Even Yunchang was surprised. It was no secret to the alchemists that there were 48 basic crafting methods, but it was very rare for an apprentice martial warrior to know this. A thought suddenly came to her mind. They say this Li Yunxiao is illiterate in martial arts. Could it be that he has a gift in the crafting of weapons, which is why he has gathered a lot of information to learn by himself? The idea set her heart racing. If she could train an alchemist, it was worth more than a warrior. Let me test him again. Yunchang looked up and saw that Li Yunxiao was looking at her with a hint of smile in his eyes, which gave her a feeling as if a teacher were looking at his disciple. That made anger rise in her. With a cold grin, she said, "Don't think you can skip class just because you've learned something esoteric. I'll ask you one more question. If you can answer that, you can skip the rest of my class and I'll pass you with a full mark. But if you can't answer that, you will stay in the tenfold gravity chamber for 6 hours. Tell me why we need to add sky crystal sand when making weapons. Stay in the tenfold gravity chamber for 6 hours? That's too harsh. Ha ha. Don't you see that Teacher Nalen is in a bad mood today? The brat has brought himself into the storm. Well, he deserved it. Look at his face, it looks like it needs some slaps. How I wish I could step on him a few times. Wow, did you hear that? That's a tough question. Everybody knows that sky crystal sand needs to be added when crafting weapons, and there's no reason why. Yeah, it's like asking you why 1 + 1 = 2. Ha ha. It seems that Teacher Nalen is trying to embarrass Li Yunxiao. Stay in the tenfold gravity chamber for 6 hours? Li Yunxiao shook his head slightly, feeling a little helpless. If it were before, he would not feel anything even with 1,000-fold gravitational force. But 10 times the force of gravity was a bit too much for his current body. His helpless expression was quickly interpreted by Yunchang as fear, which made her completely erase the admiration she had just expressed for him, and she could not help but look down on him. He is indeed illiterate in martial arts. He has not changed at all. Moreover, she immediately regretted it as soon as the question left her mouth. She felt a vague sense of guilt and remorse for playing such a trick on her student. After all, he had just answered a basic question very well, at least showing a studious side which was different from the past. Would she hurt his confidence and self-esteem by doing this? Would she strangle a flower that was going to turn over a new leaf? As her mind wandered, Li Yunxiao answered almost thoughtlessly. In fact, the crafting of weapons does not necessarily require sky crystal sand. But it is not easy for the ordinary alchemists to master the degree of fusion between materials during the refining process after quenching. So, they need to use it, which has a neutralization property, to play a moderating role. There was an eerie silence when he had finished. Everyone looked at each other because they could not understand what he was saying. I want to stand at the pinnacle of the world. The students looked at each other in astonishment. What Li Yunxiao had said was completely beyond the scope of the textbook. But Luo Yunchang heard it all clearly. Her pupils constricted as she blurted out, "If that is the case, the more sky crystal sand you add in the process of crafting weapons, the better. But why is it that during the melting of karmat mixed with red copper, the more sky crystal sand is added, the more likely it is to fail?" This was the problem that had puzzled her for days, and she could not find a solution no matter how hard she racked her brain. That was why she had been depressed these days. Now that she had blurted out the problem in her heart, she did not look like she was testing Yunxiao, but someone who was seeking advice. The whole class looked at her with their mouths wide open. Why did she look so different from the learned, frosty, proud teacher Luo they remembered? Yunxiao answered patiently with the same carefree expression, because even though red copper's attribute is metal, it is actually inclined more toward the fire element. So, it has a great melting ability for karmat. As a result, many alchemists prefer karmat when upgrading red copper weapons. But, if it contains sky crystal sand, it's a different story. He paused for a brief moment, and when he saw the look on Yunchang's face, the thirst for knowledge, he smiled and could not help remembering the disciples who had followed him. Because the attribute of sky crystal sand is water, it neutralizes red copper's fire attribute. So, the more you add, the worse red copper's ability to melt karmat gets. Oh, I see. Yunchang's eyes gleamed with excitement. So that's why. No wonder I never succeeded. What should I do? Very simple. Treat sky crystal sand as an impurity and use the refinement essence to remove it, Yunxiao said with a hint of a smile in his eyes. Ah! Yunchang exclaimed again, how could I be so stupid as to not think of such a simple solution? Li Yunxiao, you must come to the next class. Now it's time for self-study. Did Teacher Luo just ask a question? From now on, he doesn't need to attend her classes, right? What's going on with Yun today? How did he suddenly have an enlightenment? The talent requirements for an alchemist are much higher than those for a martial artist. Can a waste who can't even open a single meridian follow the path of alchemy? The boss is right. Nonsense, an alchemy genius. This is the capital of the Tianwu Kingdom. Yangdi. Yangdi, this clumsy disciple, happens to be the alchemy expert here. This statue. It should be the one Yangdi sculpted for me. I'll give him credit for being filial. 15 years later, I, Gu Feiyang, am reborn as Li Yunxiao. Facing one's own statue does bring about some emotions, doesn't it? That's a wrap. Tianshui Kingdom's capital alchemist tower. It's a pity that my current body is so weak. I'm already this old and haven't even opened my meridians. It's like having a naturally poor constitution. At the very least, in my previous life, I was ranked third among the martial emperor's sect masters in the Tianwu continent. Now, all I need to do is find a way. If everything goes smoothly, it will only take a few years for me to regain my. By that time, with my cultivation from 2 lifetimes, I can definitely strive for higher levels. I want to stand at the pinnacle of the world.